Testing, testing. Can anybody hear that? Can anybody hear me now?
I can hear you, sir.
Okay, great. Stand by just another second. How's that? Can you hear me now?
Still got you.
I see some still nods. Great. All right. Well, I'm sorry about that. A little technical difficulty there. Hope everyone else can hear me. Appreciate those of you, and that reminded me of one other housekeeping item. Those of you who told me that in the chat, I do try to monitor that as we go, so feel free to give any comments or questions there. Bring that chat box back up. Hopefully everybody can hear them. Great. All right, sorry for that. So let me do a quick brief reintroduction. Jeff Hammond, I'm a consultant working for NDOT, and I am recording this meeting. If you didn't hear that, this meeting will be made available within the next couple of days. We'll have it on Metro's Traffic Calming web page. I'll share a link to that later. And so you have this, if you have a neighbor or someone who wasn't able to attend with us, this will be available for them. So sorry, thanks again for attending. And three things I want to cover tonight. One is just a little bit of background about the traffic calming program and how Bonnafair got inducted into it. Secondly, we'll take a look at the preliminary concept that we have for the possible traffic calming project on the street. And then lastly, we'll leave you with some next steps, things you can expect from us and how this process goes as we move forward with it. So again, sorry for the rough start there, and thanks for attending. A little bit about the traffic calming program. I think as we roll more and more of these projects out, people have a better understanding about what's available and the service that we provide through NDOT. But we do focus on residential streets because we know traffic speed on your street and traffic calming can really be a safety issue, but it can also be very much a quality of life issue. And so we really try to bring this project to folks in their residential neighborhoods where it affects them pretty much on a daily basis. We do focus on physical solutions as opposed to kind of informational things. We do have some of those tools that just provide information, but we have found that nothing slows traffic down quite as effectively as putting something physical in the street, whether to drive over, to drive around, et cetera, and slowing traffic down. And that is what we focus on, is speed reduction. That sounds obvious, but sometimes people will engage this program hoping that we can push traffic to some other street. And I won't say that that doesn't happen. It really depends on the layout of the street. Sometimes there is a change in the amount of traffic that may be on your street, but that's really not our focus. We want traffic to stay pretty much where it is. We just want it to slow down and drive more responsibly in your neighborhood. We know that we don't do this in isolation. There are other aspects to traffic calming. We focus on the engineering part. That is the part that is in NDOT's purview, things in the right of way, but there's also an enforcement component with MNPD, who of course is responsible for ticketing and traffic enforcement in the county. Unfortunately, their resources aren't such that they just have a lot of ability to park a cruiser and write tickets on a regular basis. Y'all probably are aware of that. They do very important work for our city, and traffic enforcement isn't always high on their list. And so they're very much partners with us, appreciate the supportive of the work that the traffic calming program does. And we know that works in concert with enforcement and also education. And NDOT and others put together some public service announcements and those kinds of things. And as I mentioned, we do have some tools that reinforce the messaging about speeding that we will deploy occasionally. One of those is information like this, that we like to remind people about why is it that we are serious about getting speeds under control in neighborhoods particularly, and that's because of the dire results in the event there is a pedestrian versus vehicle crash. We know that if that happens, if the vehicle is operating at a slower speed, that person has a much higher chance of surviving that incident. Probably goes without saying, but it's really important to remind us of that. Traffic calming also continues to be very much an in-demand program in the county. In this latest cohort that you all are a part of, we had over 500 applications for streets just like this one. And so we just say that so that you know you're not alone out there with some of the issues that you may have seen. It's concerning speeding on the street. There's a lot of folks that have very similar issues. We typically can handle about, and are funded to handle about 50 projects per year. This past summer, when we rolled this project out, there was some additional surplus funds that Metro Council saw fit to allocate towards additional traffic calming projects. I think largely because the demand was so high for them. And so we're actually doing a few more this year than normal. One thing we like to point out and remind you of if you're not, or introduce you to if you're not familiar with it, is Hub Nashville. It's a great resource for us as residents of Davidson County. You can log in at hub.nashville.gov or call 311. And it's a great starting point for all kind of requests of the local government. Sometimes, and we point this out because sometimes people ask for things that are related to traffic, but not necessarily a part of what we can offer in the traffic calming program, like additional stop signs or traffic signal or sidewalks. We know all of those are a part potentially of traffic calming. We just don't do that here in this program, but this Hub Nashville is where you would start a request like that. And it also is got a lot of other stuff on there besides just transportation. So check that out if you're not familiar with it. It's a great tool. But back to Bonnafair and this in this process, because we have so much demand, we have over 500 streets, we have to make some decisions about what streets are going to get some attention in the way of a traffic calming project. And this is how we do that. We prioritize those based on data that is collected. About 70% of the scoring that we use comes from the types of data you probably would have guessed. It's the amount of traffic on the street, the volume of traffic, as well as the speed of traffic on the street. That's the majority of the score. But another 30% comes from some of those other users. 15% of that is does the street have a documented instance of a pedestrian crash? 10% of it has to do with, are there other accommodations on the street like sidewalks or bike lanes? If you don't have sidewalks, your score goes up. And then are there destinations? Are there things that we think make it more likely that a person or that people will be walking on the street? Things like schools in the area, parks that people may want to walk to, those types of things. So we look at all of that data and roll all of that up into a score and essentially just rank them. And we do usually, like I said, about the top 50 in the year. This time a few more, but that's how we arrive at the decision to do a traffic calming project. Here's some of that data on specific to your street. The speed that we collected on the street was 40 miles an hour. Now that's not the maximum we saw. That's not the average that we saw. We call that the 85th percentile speed, which is just sort of our industry's way of measuring or defining a speeding issue. What it essentially says is 15% of the traffic on your street was going faster than 40 miles an hour. That is really on the higher end. It's higher than average, even for the streets that we do a traffic calming project on. So, you know, that was probably the leading reason why this street was selected. That's a fairly high 85th percentile speed for us. The traffic volume is a little over 1,500 cars a day. People are sometimes surprised. that there's that much traffic on the street. It is a lot of cars, but it's not unusual. We will do traffic calming projects like this up to 5,000 cars a day on the street, so we're well within that. And that's probably pretty typical for the types of streets we're working on from a daily traffic volume aspect. Your street's about 22 feet wide. I know it varies a little bit in location, but that's, again, pretty typical. That's 2 lanes, 11 feet wide each. Pretty standard metro street. And then the section that we're working with is about a quarter of a mile long. And I'll show you that here. So this may be a little difficult to read, this map, but Bonnafair is the little green line over toward the upper left-hand corner. Hopefully you can see that. This is a snapshot of an interactive map that is available to you, again, on Metro's Traffic Calming webpage. You can zoom into that. You can pan around all over Davidson County and see a little bit of a status on every traffic calming program that we've got in the system. And they're color-coded to mean certain things. So that pea green color that is on your street just indicates that we're in the design phase right now. We're meeting with you in our design work. Some of the other colors, you may see Tyler Drive, by the way, on the other side of Lebanon Road, also kind of running in a parallel process with you right now. That's the other green line. Down toward the back on the left-hand side of this map, toward the bottom, you see a purple line. I believe that's on Plantation Drive. That purple line just means that there has been an application put in for that street. It has not been selected yet, but it's kind of competing with all the others, but it does have an application in. If you pan around at other places on this map, you'll see some blue lines and specifically some blue dashed lines. That indicates that there has been a traffic calming project implemented on that street. And we point those out because you may, if you're not familiar with the types of products we use and you'd like to go drive on those and experience those and see how you like them, that map gives you some indication about where a project may be close to you, so you can go and do that. So feel free to take a look at that in a little more detail than what you have here. But what we do show here are the limits of the project. Again, we're going from Jacksonian Drive at the south, the end of your street, up to kind of midway through the street on Bonneview Drive. That's generally based on the application that we received. I think in this case, we actually received an application for a shorter project than that. But as we looked at it, we will sometimes make the determination that just to have a logical beginning and end of the project, we extended it down to Jacksonian and got a little bit of a longer project out of that. I'm going to go through some of the tools that we use briefly before I show you the plan, because this will be a speed cushion based plan. Our concept right now is that, as are 95+% of the projects that we are doing. So typically when people engage the traffic calming program, they think they're getting speed cushion, kind of for good reason. This has become what our go-to, sorry, I didn't advance the slide, what our go-to tool is the speed cushion. So if you're not familiar with these are a dense recycled rubber. It is manufactured in a factory, and we like that because that means we know exactly how they're going to perform. Every speed cushion that we put in Metro is this same product from the same company, and so we're very comfortable with how it performs and how durable it is and what it looks like and all of those things that may be important to you. We can configure them several different ways. You see some different aspects of that here. And typically they're 2 side by side. That's what we would anticipate for your street. Occasionally they're 3 wide. We've got some that have been 4 and 5 wide. And all that has to do with is how wide the street is, with our major objective being we just don't want cars to be able to drive around them, because if we give any room at all, cars will drive around them. Sometimes we protect the edges with those signs that you see there, like in the upper left-hand corner. Sometimes we'll use like a plastic delineator. You see an example of that in the picture in the bottom right-hand corner. I don't know that we'll need either of those for your street. Again, it's 22 feet wide, which is pretty typical, and I think we would get a good result with a 2 wide speed cushion configuration. They're 6 feet wide, which means they're too wide for your car to straddle them. You won't be able to straddle these completely, but they're not so wide that, I guess they're narrow enough, I should say, that some cars, extra large wheelbase vehicles, can come closer to straddling them. And that's the point about having them in this type of broken configuration. We want things like ambulances and fire trucks to be able to get where they're going and not be as impacted about by these. And so that's why they're specifically manufactured at 6 feet wide, because that's about the wheelbase of those emergency response vehicles. They're also only about 3 inches tall, which is tall enough to do their job and slow traffic down. And then the other design feature that we have is we can vary the length of them. The standard length that Metro uses is a 10.5-foot cushion, but we can get a shorter one that's 7. It's a little more aggressive. It brings about a slower speed. We usually only use those in very dense areas, like Germantown and East Nashville, places where you just have a lot of very urban type of activity. And then we can make them longer, up to 14 feet. We typically will use those in further out, more rural locations, but 10.5 is kind of the standard that we have seen gives us the best result. A very close cousin of that is speed tables. We really don't use these unless it's a very specific and unique circumstance. I think Parks is putting some in their park areas where emergency vehicle considerations are not as great, but they essentially work the same way. They just go all the way across the street. We do have a little bit of before and after data. I wish we had more. Every street's a little bit different. This was some data that we're showing here where we saw about a 9 to 12 mile an hour difference from the before and after. But that was when our before was starting at, the 85th percentile speed was 37 in this case. Yours was 40, so we may actually see more of a reduction. But it really just depends on, the street itself and how we configure them and those kinds of things. All of that to say, our data shows that it works. I think if you've driven on any of these streets that have speed cushions on them, you'll see that they certainly do have an impact on speeds there. Another tool that we have that we can use when the conditions warrant is a feedback sign. That doesn't put anything in the road. And so I think that the effectiveness of these are a little bit different. Some data has been collected and shows, a pretty significant speed reduction of 6 to 7 miles an hour. But what we don't know is how long lasting is that. Some people think these are very effective and is the only tool you need. Other people say they do almost nothing. So the jury's still out on that, especially in the long-term effectiveness. But we do use these when we can't otherwise use something like a speed cushion. Maybe there's a real steep hill, or maybe the traffic volumes are too high, something like that. We will supplement a traffic calming project with the feedback sign. Occasionally, we will change or add or modify the pavement markings on the street. Typically, with the idea being, if we can visually narrow the road, it tends to make traffic drive a little slower. May not always be the case. This is an example where a center line was added, and some folks might say, well, that just communicates the road is a little busier and more major than it actually is, and might actually encourage a higher speed. So again, we do this very carefully and judiciously when we make a decision to add pavement markings. Don't do it very often, but we do have that in our toolbox. One aspect that I saw referenced here, and I'll come back to some of these comments in the chat box. This one was actually referenced here, is bulb outs and chicanes. We do keep those in the program. Typically, we use these in a little more urban areas, again, often where the street it's wide enough that, you know, it was probably built years ago to accommodate some on-street parking. It has on-street parking. And so that tends to result in some pretty wide streets. And so to narrow those, especially at intersections, we might use some treatments like this. One drawback probably that we experience in most neighborhoods is when we talk about these, this really is what our tools look like. We have paint and we have those delineators, and some people will say, you know, in their neighborhood, they wish it could, you know, be a little nicer looking, but this is what we have to offer in the way of that, just because we're trying to spread projects all around. But those can be effective, especially at intersection locations. Chicanes, if you're not familiar with it, that's the picture over on the right-hand side. You see an aerial view and a street view. It kind of introduces an artificial zigzag in the road so that traffic has to drive around. I can only think of about 2 locations in Davidson County where we have these, and they work better if there's, you know, some on-street parking or something to try and force traffic to make that meandering movement to slow down. But so again, we don't introduce these very often. The conditions have to be, you know, pretty just right for us to do that. The last one I'll mention is traffic circles. We do have a few of these around. We did a number of them several years ago, but those are really still being evaluated. There are some complications with certain types of vehicles, like school buses in particular, that, you know, school bus any year can show up on pretty much any road depending on where children are. And so sometimes they have a hard time navigating these. Again, you got to have an awful lot of pavement width out there to accommodate something like that and make that a good traffic calming feature, but it's a possibility. So here's what I really wanted to get to. I know I've talked a lot, but I wanted to show you a slide of your street. Now, keep in mind, if you're, you know, directionally astute, which I'm not, but you note here that north is to the right. And so Jacksonian, your project starts there at Jacksonian, which is the street to the left where you see that little stop sign. And then going north from there, we're on Bonnafair up to the end of the project at Bonneview. We have kind of spotted in there, again, this is a concept for this quarter-mile street, 4 speed cushion locations. And let me tell you how we arrive at that. What we do is we take the length of that. So from Jacksonian to Bonneview is an unbroken length. There's no stop signs or anything in the middle of that. That's an unbroken length of about 1,400 feet, just a little bit less than that. We divide that length by an ideal spacing. So we know that if we can put speed cushions in at a spacing somewhere around 300 to 500 feet typically, that's going to give us a good result. It's close enough together that cars don't just you know, clear one set of speed cushions and step on the gas to get to the next one. By the time you're going over one, you can see the next one. And so most people won't speed up significantly to get there. But it's far enough apart that it doesn't push traffic to other streets or just become terribly obnoxious for you all who will be driving over these every day. And so that's kind of the art and the science of it, is to try to space those just right. We found that if we can be somewhere around 400 feet, we'll typically end with a good product. Now, there's a couple of other considerations as well. One of those, as I mentioned earlier, we don't put speed cushions on steep slopes. So if there's any hills in the area, we want to steer clear of those. We don't put it in sharp curves. I don't think you have anything I would call here a sharp curve that you have to steer around. You do have a little bit of a hill here in this more southern portion of the street. And then the one that often gets us in more built up, a little bit denser areas than yours probably are our driveways. We don't want to block anyone's driveway. And as you can imagine, there are some streets we work on where it's one driveway after the next, and it's kind of hard to spot those in. I don't think we'll have any of those issues. You do see a little bit of a difference in spacing. I think that's because of the hill that we've got toward the southern end of the project. You've got the intersection there with Bonnawood, and so of course we avoid intersections as well. But anyway, that's what we've got in terms of a concept. It's a pretty straightforward speed cushion project, but it's very similar to a whole lot of streets that we're working on in Nashville now. So If anyone wants to unmute and give me any feedback on that, I would love to have it. I'm going to be looking over here at the chat as well. And I see some comments about feedback signs and the belief that those are effective. You'd rather see those than speed coaching.
Hey, Jeff.
That's good feedback. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Jeff. I live on Bonnafair, and what I think you're saying makes a lot of sense. I would like to learn how to get my street on the traffic calming list. I'm on Bonnafair and Jacksonian on the, like, I guess Lebanon Pike end, not the school end of Bonnafair, if that makes sense. And our issue is we have residents who are mainly living in the duplexes, the slumlord section of Bonnafair, and they speed down during nice days. They do donuts in the intersection at Jacksonian and Bonnafair. And if you drive by, like, you'll see the tire marks. It's well documented. They throw out beer cans. And so, you know, traffic calming is great, but where is Metro PD? Because we have a lot of kids that live on the street. I see them walking to and from school when the weather is nice, and I'm really worried that these people are going to injure or kill someone.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. One is how you get Bonnafair or any street into the program, and it's the same way they did on Bonnafair here, where there's an application process. Metro's typically does 2 application windows per year. I think the spring one just closed. I may be wrong on that, but if you check the website, it has more information on those application periods. But that's how you get into the program, is you apply into that, and then it's put into that prioritization process where we collect data and all that. But what you're describing may or may not be picked up by our data collection. I get it. You know, it's if that type of behavior doesn't happen to be happening while we're out there collecting data, it's kind of lost on us. And so another thing that you can do that is in between, that goes on all the time, whether there's an application window or not, is you can request a speed feedback trailer. So it's a portable version of that sign that I showed you. They will come out there and they will park that on the side of the street. And I think they do it, you know, maybe for like 2 weeks at a time or something like that. I think the backlog is fairly long on that, last time I had heard. But anyway, that's a resource that's available to you as well using that Hub Nashville. And then the last one, and there's a contact number on the Traffic Calming webpage, is to call MNPD and your precinct and see if they can dedicate some resources to that. It never hurts to let them know that and just make sure that they stay aware of it. And that's about all I can offer for, you know, for bad behavior like that. I'm sorry you're having that.
Gotcha. Yeah, Jordan, I saw that you were on the call. You know, now that the weather's nice, they're going to be out and doing it again. I mean, it's always the same little tiny trucks. You know, Metro could just park there and they would make plenty of tickets and arrests. But I always fear when I see them speeding up and down that they're going to hurt a child or a person walking or whatnot.
Yeah, I'm so driving right now. I had to off video, but if you can do me a favor, shoot me an email with those details and I'll get MNPD to take a look at it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm putting just in case, my email in the chat there.
Very good. Any other comments or questions about the proposal?
Yes. Mr. Cummins?
I can. Go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. The only thing that I wanted to say was that why I don't think the feedback signs would necessarily be effective is just a few weeks ago we had an incident where there was a drunk driver. I don't know to what extent they had what their blood alcohol level was or anything other than just by the evidence of the empty beer cans that had fallen out of the truck after the truck, you know, basically had the close call with another car coming in the opposite direction. And I don't know how both houses were unscathed, didn't take any damage, but you can see mostly the damage in the front yard of the person's house. And essentially the person, I guess
he went across the yard.
Yeah, he went across the yard. It was all caught on the neighbor's Ring video. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that when a person is in that state of mind and they're driving that fast, that's why I'm thinking, there needs to be something a little bit more effective than just a feedback sign. So it's not, no offense to anybody, but we were literally maybe just 200 feet when it's all said and done from this situation. So that's why, this is very near and close to me. So I'm thinking, something needs to be a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Effective.
Something a little bit more effective than just, feedback signs.
Yeah, appreciate that input. We tend to agree with you. I mean, on a street like this that is a local street, the traffic volume is what it is here, and the speed given what it is here. Our recommendation would be that a speed cushion is going to be more effective. It's not to say the feedback sign might not have its place and have some effectiveness, especially in the short term. But given the fact that I don't, y'all probably know better than I do how much cut through traffic. It seems to me that this street kind of leads back into just sort of a larger neighborhood, and it's the same traffic every day. You may have people finding their way over and cutting through that are not familiar, but typically I would think it's the same people every day. If they see that same sign every day and know that all it does is flash a light at you, they may or may not, pay any attention to it. It's just my thought. I wish I had more data to back that up, but again, even on feedback signs, it really depends on the layout of the street and who's using the street as to how effective it will be.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. I wanted to know,
Hi.
how do you get the project expanded? Like further down the street?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I was kind of thinking of that as I looked at this. Of course, there is Bonnafair that extends up north of Bonneview as well and could go further. We tend to stay pretty close to the application that we're given. As I mentioned, the application, I'm almost positive, I looked at this, but it's been a couple days ago, was actually much shorter than, it was only one block, I think, from Bonnehurst to Bonneview. So that was a very short project. And we don't do these projects that we feel like it's becoming a real isolated point in the road. So we did extend it down to Jacksonian already. The way to, we don't really have a process for extending it at this point. It's in the program as the limits. What I would say though is once this goes in, what I would hope would happen is Bonnafair north of Bonneview would also be affected, whether that's fewer drivers or hopefully, slower drivers that, might get the message and slow down north of Bonneview. Hopefully that would happen. If it doesn't, you can always apply in for a different, that next northern segment and go through that process to try and get selected again. Given what speeds were on this south part, I think there's a reasonable chance that it could, even if after the speed cushions go in. So that's what I would say, is that it would need to be another application process in. Hopefully it won't take that, but if it does, you can always feel free to reapply.
Hi, Jeff. This is Jessica. I'd like to kind of continue on what Tina was saying, and also Edward, because I think we're all back further on Bonnafair is kind of the impression that I'm getting. I am very close to the church that is towards the back, and the traffic is quite ridiculous. And unfortunately, it's not always the most courteous of attendees. And there's a lot of speeding multiple days of the week. It's not even just an issue on Sundays. And I fully understand the issue of hills. The freeze that we had in January caused absolute havoc in the back of the neighborhood, and cars were all over the place on these hills. I almost got stuck myself. So I understand not putting them on a hill, but at the intersection where the church is, at Hermitage Ridge and Bonnafair. That is a very wide intersection. I haven't had to deal yet with what Mary's talking about with evidence of people doing donuts in that intersection, because it is on a hill and it is a very limited view on either side. But if there were a way to extend this project, I think that could be amazing. I don't know if a roundabout would really do any good there, but the fact that those cushions are not proposed further down the street is a little disappointing to me. I would love to see this project extended further down the street. I don't know about the very, very back, but just knowing the speed that I see cars pass my house, it's very troubling to see that this isn't going to extend further back.
Yeah. No, I understand that, and certainly hear where you're coming from on that. So that's something I can take back to Metro, back to the staff there at NDOT, and say we've had this concern. I think there's some merit to it. You know, I just tell you again that our experience has been they like to stay very close to that application that is put in, but we can certainly bring that to their attention.
I would also agree with Edward's statement that the signage will do nothing. The change in speed limit has done nothing. We're still, those of us that try are tailgated incessantly. And I don't think that would do any good. I think a physical barrier is the only thing that's really going to have an impact.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep. So I wanted to chime in. Jeff, first of all, thank you for a very clear and concise presentation. I can tell you've done quite a few of these. You answered all my questions, or most of them, before I had them. So kudos to you and your team. So I'm very excited about having these speed reduction measures. I'm excited to walk my dog on Bonnafair now and not worry about being even more run off the road. But my biggest concern is the cut through traffic that this will create on, for instance, Bonneview. I foresee a lot of residents who potentially live in the back of the neighborhood of Bonnafair and further on those local connecting streets, skipping through these speed cushions by utilizing Bonneview, and it's just displacing the problem. And I was curious as to what your thoughts were, or your if there were any measures in place to kind of prevent that from happening.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that we hear on a lot of projects. You know, does this ever push traffic off of the street onto another? And that's why we start by saying that's not our objective. But does it happen? I think it's entirely possible that it will. I think it depends. I know I've said this a bunch of times. I think it just really depends on the neighborhood. You know, where traffic is going. I don't have a lot of knowledge on that. But just looking at it, I think that might happen less here than in some other cases. And for one reason, this is a pretty short stretch, as has been pointed out. So that it's just this last quarter mile that's being treated this way. So it may be that people recognize, hey, if I just slow down, that's still my fastest way to get where I'm going, is just to stay on Bonnafair and slow down and drive that responsibly. That's what we would hope. But might it push traffic toward Bonneview? It absolutely might. But to make any predictions about how much that would happen and to what degree is we don't know. But the answer to your question is no. When we do a traffic calming project, we really just focus on the project at hand. And then what we tell folks, you know, if in the unfortunate instance that there is traffic that is pushed to Bonneview, you can always make that application, you know, to receive the treatment on that street. I hate that. I hate to feel like we're just moving the problem around, but at some point people are going to drive, you know, how they're going to drive, and it's in the lack of enforcement or something, we have to kind of chase this problem. That's how it has to happen.
That was very well said. So thank you very much for answering my question.
I wanted to say hello. I wanted to say I'm very happy with the way that these are laid out. I am thrilled about that. I do live within that section, and I am really excited about it. When you guys were talking about the snow, the stuff that happened, I'm not even on much of a hill at all. Like, I'm on the closer to Jacksonian side, and there were cars getting stuck on just that tiniest little incline that's there. Like I'm between that like Bonnahurst and Bonnawood, and that is not even a hill. Like, but what happens is everybody comes down from that hill like on the farther side, and just it's like a drag strip all the way to the stop sign. So this, and we have been requesting, my neighbor and I, like right next door, we have been requesting this and pushing, you know, just like keeping this coming up. And so seeing this, and yes, it needs to be a physical barrier. Absolutely, it needs to be a physical barrier, because any of those signs or anything, it's just nothing works. We've, you know, even put stuff, you know, I put my trash can close to the street, and it's like it's been hit once, and yeah, it's risky having anything near the street. So I'm very happy with this, and I know that it's progress, and I do hope that more can happen. I hope it doesn't redirect, you know, traffic. But yeah, on this straight shot right there, I'm very excited that that is like the potential.
Great. Thanks for the feedback. Anybody else? I'll move ahead now, but feel free, if we need to come back and take a look at this, I'm more than happy to do it. But I do want to kind of give you some idea for what to expect from us and how this process flows out. From this meeting, this is probably an overcomplicated diagram showing how we go. We're at the red circle now, our neighborhood meeting. What we will do after tonight, it sounds like there's consensus, at least for the street that we have identified for the project now, to move forward into design. So what I just showed you there is a pretty rough concept, very high level. I recognize that. Hopefully it gives you, though, a good enough idea for what we are proposing that you can react to. It sounds like you can. We will go from this point to a detailed design plan. We'll actually come out on the street, we'll walk it, we'll make measurements, and we will make available to you our very detailed design plan. And they'll say, you know, you'll flip through them, and they're not overly technical, but they will give you very specific idea about where the speed cushions would be placed. They'll say something like, you know, this set would be 62 feet from 123 Bonnafair Drive, something like that. So you'll know exactly what we have designed. That set of design plans will go on NDOT's webpage, and then after that has been put out there on the website, we will send out a ballot. And I'll talk a little bit more about that ballot process in here in just a second. So we do like to make sure that the street has every opportunity to weigh in on this and give us their opinion. We know the whole street's not represented here tonight, so we make another opportunity available for everyone just to give their thoughts on the process. That online ballot process is 6 weeks, and so at the end of that, then we take up those results, and if it is decided to move forward with the project, we'll move it into the construction queue. That's where the news is not very good, because right now our construction queue is about a year long from the time that ballot, if it passes, from the time that happens to you see any speed cushions. It's that long. I hate saying that. I know that's a disappointment if you're for these. But that's the reality of it. NDOT knows it's a problem. They're working with their contractors to shorten that every bit that they can, but it's just a big backlog. And I only say that so you don't think, you know, by 4th of July, there'll be speed cushions out there on the street. It won't happen that quickly. I will mention here that in the past, we've done 2 mandatory meetings just like tonight, but what we found over the past few iterations of this was that we come back to a second meeting, and it's generally what I just showed you with a little more detail, and people said, you know, that took another 3 months when I wish we'd have just moved ahead with the process. So we do make a second meeting optional. If anybody wants to get back together, we're happy to do that. But if you kind of see what we have proposed and are okay with that, we can move straight into that design phase and then the ballot. So the way the ballot works is, if you got a card for tonight's meeting, the ballot will look the ballot card will look a lot like that. That card will come in your mailbox, and it's got a unique QR code to it, and it takes you to a Nashville.gov voting page. Just give us your name and some information and vote yes or no. At the end of that, again, that's a 6-week period. At the end of that, we gather all those responses up, and if 2/3 of the people have voted in favor of the project, we'll move it forward. So that's how that works. Sometimes people ask who gets to vote, and so the policy has been set to where anyone who owns property that is adjacent to the right-of-way of the street that we are traffic calming gets a vote in that process. So we throw out any kind of commercial properties. I don't think you have any on this street. If anyone owns more than one property, we only send in one ballot. You only get to vote once, no matter how much property you own. If there are any vacant, I don't think I see any vacant parcels here, but they don't get to vote. And again, it is the owner of the property. So if you have if you rent, or if your neighbor rents the property, you probably won't see the card unless your landlord says, "Here, take this and vote how you see fit." Those do go to the owner of the property. And we know there's people that our cards are going to Michigan and California and everywhere else, I guess, because people own property that live all over the place. But anyhow. We also know that there are plenty of people who use this street that are not one of these highlighted properties. It's totally understood, and we see all sides of that issue, but the policy for various reasons have been set to this. It's been working pretty well, I think. Any questions, comments on the ballot process?
Sorry, so technically, even though we got the card in the mail, if we're not in the affected area, we can't vote on this.
You got a card for this meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you where are you, on the far side of Bonneview?
No, we are on Bonnafair going further north. We're right on the corner of Bonnafair and Bonnefield.
Okay. Yeah, I may have sent more cards out further north, but that's correct. If we stop the project there at Bonneview, then we would only ballot the folks up to Bonneview. That's correct.
All right. Yeah, it's disappointing. I understand, and I totally get it, but it's still disappointing to see that this is really just kind of limited with respect to, I mean, it's a great start, but at the same time too, it's not going far enough, I guess.
Yeah. No, I totally hear you, and yeah, we'll discuss it with NDOT and see if they want to make any changes to that, and just tell them what we heard on the meeting was your input, that there were several folks that felt like we should try to extend this and just see where that goes. I'd be glad to do that.
I have a question. Do you have
Sure.
to meet quorum for this to be approved or accepted? Because if one person votes yes, that's 100%. So I'm just curious if there's a minimum required number of voters.
No, that's a good question. No, there's not. And we haven't run into a situation where we felt like, the voter turnout was just so unreasonably low that it wasn't representative. Typically we have, 20 to 30% of the voting of the, possible voters actually vote. So I joke and tell people I think we do better than a presidential election. I think people want to vote more on traffic calming than they care about who's president, but it is pretty high. And one other thing that is available on NDOT's website is you can actually see the results of the votes in all these neighborhoods. So you can see how many pass, how many fail, and by what percentage. So if you're curious and see what the chances are, feel free to look into that. But yeah, we used to do an actual door-to-door petition, and we made the applicant, whoever had applied for it, had to go door-to-door to their neighbors, and they had to get 70% of everybody who owned property. And we, there were some neighborhoods that did it, but there were very few. And so some people still remember that. And so they come to these meetings thinking, you know, there has to be a certain percent that has to vote, but that's not the case. We changed it. It's just like a real election. You only count if you're voted. So we encourage everyone to vote. Give you some contact information. Feel free to reach out if there's something that you thought of later, didn't want to ask on the meeting here tonight. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm Jeff in the green email address below. The NDOT TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov. I know that looks like a generic email address. It is, but that's just because there are multiple staff members there with Metro who check that and have access to that. So feel free to reach out to me or them or both of us if you have any other questions or comment about this. We'll be glad to hear from you and our best to get back to you quickly. I told you I'd give you a link to their web page. That's here, TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov. A lot of resources there. If you really want to learn a lot about traffic calming, they've done a great job. Have some process manuals, those ballot results, that interactive map that we looked at. You can see all the designs for any speed traffic calming project you want to in Nashville. Posted there as well. It is a beautiful evening in Nashville, Tennessee, and I don't want to hold you guys any longer than I have to, but be glad to answer any other questions if you've got them, any comments.
I just want to say we appreciate your time and your concern.
Jeff, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, too, for jumping on and the feedback. I'm going to follow up with Director Alarcon on a couple of items as well. So appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.